Diablo 4 has arrived. As the forces of hell gather, only you can stand in their way. Journey across the expansive open world of Sanctuary. Choose from 5 powerful classes, then progress them to fit your playstyle. Adventure with your friends in up to 4-player co-op with cross-play and cross-progression on all platforms. Welcome to hell. Diablo 4, available now. Rated M for mature. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
Get going on your summer checklist, starting with an oil change from Midas, so you can keep your ride ready for what's next. Make the trip before the trip to Midas and get $20 off a full synthetic oil change. Request your appointment at Midas.com.
Previously on Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic, a 30-year retrospective.
We originally took the report as a missing person, and we have changed it now, acting on the assumption that she may have been abducted.
It's a shock. We're a very quiet, safe community, and when something like this happens, it just seems unbelievable.
What went on was a ploy that was developed and carried through, and it looked like a natural action going on. It didn't look out of the ordinary at all.
If anybody has seen her get into a vehicle, I think that would help quite a bit.
We also have reason to believe that Amy left with that individual from that location and went to another area where they may have gone shopping, and that would be a mall or a shopping center somewhere in the area.
We have had thousands of suspects called in to our department.
Viewing all her classmates at this time, trying to get as much information as we can relative to what they saw and what they heard her say.
Whoever did this was preying on, this little girl and the love of her mother.
Early this afternoon, an anonymous caller told the FBI Amy had been dropped off at Euclid Square Mall in front of the Florsheim shoe store. Within minutes, the mall was crawling with police. They searched inside and outside, but no Amy.
I just want to, reach out and put my arms around her and give her a hug. My instincts told me the searches wouldn't produce anything. That was just my instincts. I know they had to go through that as a part of the process.
We have come to find out there was absolutely nothing regarding choir after school on Friday. I don't have any other information.
By 6, Margaret called police to report Amy as missing.
Tonight, Bay Village parents are keeping a watchful eye on their trick-or-treaters.
It's kind of scary to think what happened. I'm glad we have our parents with us.
Anybody who knew Margaret well to contact us. There are things that we would love to ask Margaret that maybe Margaret would know. We're hoping that by having people who know Margaret well reach out to us, that we can ask them some of those questions we would have, asked Margaret.
Rather than not talking about it, we are being extremely open about it.
Not that we're TV stars or people that speak in public or anything like that. You just do it because there's part of your life out there we need to get back home.
For something like this to happen in a community that is seen as safe, where people go to live to be safe, I think that kind of situation hit home with a lot of people. For something like this to happen in a community that is seen as safe, where people go to live to be safe, I think that kind of situation hit home with a lot of people.
Live in Bay Village, Tracy Carlos, News 5.
Nick from the True Crime Garage is back with us. He did a bunch of guest spots on the Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic series last year, and he is kind enough to join us again for the 30-year retrospective. And thanks so much for joining me, Nick.
Hello, Bill.
Hello.
Love the show. Thanks for having me back. And here we are 30 years later. Would you have imagined when you were 10?
I would not.
That this thing would have gone on for 30 years.
At 10, I was still under the belief that until her body was found in February of that year, or later that year, I was still under the impression they'd find her alive, because there were so many sightings and stuff like that while she was missing. And it just was one of those cases, like you'd be playing catch or ball with your buddies or whatever, and you'd be like, oh, did you hear about the latest Amy Mihaljevic sighting? And I think even a week before she was found, I think there was even a sighting at a mall in, someplace like Tulsa or something like that. And they were following up all the way up until that day. And no, I never thought it would be 30 years.
Yeah, there was one of the sightings that stands out to me. There was one in Oklahoma somewhere. And I believe the woman says that she spoke with the child and claims that the girl told her her name is Amy, or maybe even said her name is Amy Mihaljevic. I don't know. I think probably just Amy, but yeah, weird stuff. Now down here in Columbus, this is a super weird case for me because it's actually one that I was aware of when I was 10 years old. I remember seeing the breaking news when she went missing, and to my best recollection, I believe that I was probably seeing the Monday news after school. When they're saying, hey, this girl went missing on Friday, she's still missing. So I guess it wouldn't have, in a sense, been breaking news, but I remember seeing it after school on the news, probably that Monday. And then down here in Columbus, it was a bit different because just being 2 hours away, you're still a bit removed. And I don't really remember hearing much about it between the time that she went missing and the time that her body was found.
That's kind of that, just to not to interrupt, but that's kind of how a lot of these cases go. Whereas you get that real strong press push right off the bat, and then it dries up after a while.
Yeah, and locally you might have a lot of talk. You might see a lot of things on the news or hear things on the radio, read things in the newspaper. Now, keep in mind, I was 10, so I'm not staying up and watching the 11 o'clock news every night. I'm not reading anything other than the sports page. So there may have been things here. I do remember there is a weird article, and I wish that I had it, and I don't know that if you and I ever spoke about it, but there was an article in the Columbus Dispatch, and it referenced child killings in Ohio. There was like 9 of them that were unsolved at one time in the 80s. And
really?
And they asked, I don't know if like Ann Rule was doing like a book tour or something, but she was interviewed in this article in the Columbus Dispatch, and she referenced that she thought that there was like a child serial killer going on here in the state of Ohio. Now, no disrespect to the late, great Ann Rule, but I reviewed those cases that were listed in that article, and I can't remember if Amy's was one of them. I want to say that it was, but the cases were all very different and didn't seem to have any connection at all. But yeah, as far as things going on down here in Columbus, there wasn't much that I remember between the time that she went missing and the time that she was found. So being 10 years old, I don't know that I put much thought into it. Now, when she was found dead, look, when I was 10, I was still under the belief that the good guys always won.
Right.
And that 99.9% of everybody on this planet are good people, and there's a very small percentage that are bad. And that's still somewhat true, but not those exact numbers.
Sure.
But I thought for certain that they would catch whoever did this. And not knowing what I know now, I believed it would be relatively quick. And then let's fast forward to 10 years after the crime, when they released the items that she was carrying with her that day that were not recovered with her body.
And the profile.
And I remember with those items being released, I thought for sure, boom, it's any day now. It's any day now that they're going to find this person. And I think when we talk about this case, there is so much to talk about, but I think it's important to remind everyone about those items. Somebody could still have those items. We talked about on our show on True Crime Garage how sometimes a killer not only holds on to these items as a trophy, sometimes they will even give items, victim items, to loved ones or to friends as gifts.
Right.
So there could be somebody out there that is perfectly innocent of this crime, but may remember receiving a pair of earrings as a gift, or may have seen somebody carrying a what I believe to be very rare folder, that Buick Best in Class folder.
Yeah, that would have been only given to people that would have worked for Buick, or
Right.
or like something you would give to maybe like your top clients or something along those lines, is what I would compare that to. The binder, and then the boots. I mean, her boots weren't there either. So,
Right.
And
riding boots are pretty unique, from the way that I understand it. And what I mean by that is that I don't believe those boots were one of a kind.
No.
But the riding boots are typically fairly expensive, and they are built to different specifications. Now, I don't know about 1989, but I would imagine today you can buy footwear for any hobby that you have. But we're not talking about run of the mill Nike Airs or Reeboks here. We're talking about riding boots that would have been of a certain size, and there's not a million of those things out there.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the boots themselves, I don't think they were anything too fancy as far as like high end goes. I don't think they were from like Nordstrom's or anything like that, because she was just 10, and the parents weren't going to drop a lot of money on the boots. I don't think they were super high quality, but still, the fact that those were her favorite shoes, her favorite boots, and they were probably in good shape. And I don't know, I just think it's one of those odd things for somebody to take.
But if somebody could identify them to be riding boots,
where
I'm going with that is, like, I come from a large family, and lots of friends, blessed to have lots of friends. I know 2 people that own riding boots. One of them has horses on their property, right? And then the other one is a relative of that person who often rides with that person. If anybody else in my family circle or friends had a pair of riding boots, it would be strange. I would know it to be odd. Here, let me ask you a question. And I understand you're totally unprepared for this, but
go ahead.
Do you have any reasons or beliefs why the case is unsolved? Are there any things that kind of stand out to you where you go, this, because you and I have agreed, and so for the sake of this conversation, we can just move past this. We've agreed that it's not one of those cases that hasn't been solved because of a lack of effort or a lack of knowledge or resources or anything like that. They went full gusto on this thing, right? The FBI was involved within 24 hours. Yeah. And there's an FBI local office in that area. So in FBI agents living in Bay Village, it's
plenty of them.
In Bay Village, the police department is a smaller force. They're more of a suburb police force. A child abduction and murder is not their usual, and thank God that it's not. But I also don't find them to be Keystone Cops or
I actually,
like
it's funny. I think it was in either last week's or this week's part. I talked to Spetzel about that, Chief Spetzel, and I talk about how the Wetterling case, you can look at that case and you can see where they dropped the ball, where they had interviewed the guy they had his name in their notes. They went and looked at the freaking car, for crying out loud.
Right.
So those situations, those are Keystone Cop blunders. In this situation, Spetzel, I was like, you guys, I didn't ask it the same way you asked me as far as why I think it's unsolved, but I did make the comment that you pretty much had the best people out there working on this case that you could right away. It wasn't like something where they waited that extra day, or they said, you have to report the child 24 hours later. No, they took the child's, missing person case like right away. I mean, they treated it as a missing, endangered child the day, right as she entered the police station. So,
right.
And for those things to have occurred and for no resolution to come from that, it's surprising. But in the same breath, I will say that with all that was going on, having the FBI and the local other, detective bureaus and involved, it just is one of those things that you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. They all have good intentions, but communication back in 1989, where today everything's digitized and can be pretty much pulled up by anybody at some point or another, if it's a phone company or text message or whatever, a chat message between somebody on the computer, that stuff didn't exist back then. So, everything was basically handwritten tips. So could a tip have slipped through the cracks? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But is that at any fault to the police or the people that were investigating the crime? I don't believe so, because there weren't enough people to have witnessed the crime to bolster any theories. Like they had the two eyewitnesses, but they were 10-year-old kids, and Spetzel will always remember or remind me of that. Like, they were 10, and he does mention actually about how they grew up to be great kids. But eyewitness testimony, as we've known and we've come to know more throughout the years, is the least reliable of all the testimonies, or eyewitness testimony.
Well, and let's get into that a little bit, because that's really where my head's at right now. If you look at this case, this is one of those weird cases where I can think of maybe a dozen where the composite drawing of the believed to be suspect has changed over time. I believe that to be somewhat of a rare thing. The first one, well, let's do this, because there's what I call the famous one that has the image of two men on it, and they look somewhat similar, but if you really look at them closely, they look very different. If you glance at it, and if you just look at it very quickly, it really just looks like.
You mean this one?
Yeah, the one that we're both holding up right now. But if you just glance at it, at first it looks like you're looking at the same image, just one guy's wearing glasses and the other is not. Now, when you really look at it, you go, oh, these two individuals actually look quite different from one another. On top of that, there was a composite drawing that went out before this. And yeah, that's the super ugly guy. And he looks like maybe a mesh of the two combined or something. I don't know the best way to describe that, but here we are 30 years later. And one thing that I'm sitting here and I've been diving back into Amy's case for the last week or two, because on True Crime Garage, we're going to be talking about it again. And those episodes will be up probably roughly about the same time this one will be. And
yeah, you'll be able to download your shows after your show will be out before this one drops. So
yeah. So where my head is right now with the case is, I've wondered this before, but it's really hitting home now on the 30-year anniversary. And we say anniversary, but it's really marking a very sad
milestone.
Yes. So it's not like a celebration. It's a reminder of this is still unsolved, that there's still a killer out there. There's still a very dangerous, evil man out there who is, for anybody listening that suspects somebody and has not put in a tip about them, remember, this individual will always be dangerous and will always be evil and will always be capable of doing this again and doing very, very bad things. So do not hesitate. Make a phone call. Report the person. But where I'm at right now with this thing, Bill, is I cannot get over the idea that maybe it's unsolved because he doesn't look anything like the composite.
And that was the big concern with the composite being released when it was released. Now, that is straight from the mouth of the chief of police. They did not want to release the composite sketch because of the fact that it seemed so generic and the fact that it was from 2 eyewitnesses that were kids. The reason that they did release it was because they really had nothing else to go on. And other than the story from the friends that she was supposed to meet the guy, they had $45 to spend. The 2 kids that told the story about her meeting the guy aren't the same people that saw the suspect, though. This, these are 4 different children that knew about, or the 2 didn't know about the meeting, but the other 2 had been told either throughout the week or the day of, and they went to the police station the next day after Amy was reported missing. And in the Cleveland area, they did have it on the within the media, the crosshairs that night. And that was unusual for, I mean, it's not unusual for us to get tips at the news station and to say, hey, we're looking for this child. I just think it's the fact that it was a suburb that doesn't see a lot of crime. It's very demographically speaking wealthy, and just there's a low crime rate. So it's just to see that occur in that city. And for me, I remember waking up the next day, you talk about seeing it on the news, like that Monday, I would have seen it on the front page of the Plain Dealer the next day, because no matter what, you still see the front page of the paper, even if you are going for the sports page. So, and so while I'm looking at the headlines, kids are going into the police station and telling them what they saw. So it's the sketch has probably been a big deterrent, because Spetzel even said in our many talks that they followed up so many lookalike leads. It was just such a waste of time. And people wanted to get back at one another. He said, he even referenced, like, if a girlfriend was mad at her boyfriend, she might call up and be like, hey, that looks like this so-and-so. And, they'd have to go and investigate it. And that's more manpower, more man hours. And I think they did spend a lot of time chasing their tail in that regard.
One thing I've always wondered about too, and pardon me for the speculation, because that's all I can do on this case. I do know the case well, but we've talked about this before. This is one of those cases where there's meat on the bone. There's something to chew on here. And so then your mind wanders and you start to go, well, what about this? What about this? And the one thing I wondered about, and we talked about this a little bit, was the phone call from Amy to her mother while Margaret was still at work. And this buys the killer a little bit of time. There has been some recent debate if she was in his company at the time of that call. The timelines I've seen, there's no question to me that he was there and orchestrating that phone call in some manner. Now, I've wondered about that too, if they could have, because I really think that phone call only could have come from about 3 different sources. 1, a payphone; 2, a motel room; or 3, wherever he was going to take her. And for that, and I know that we say, what was the area code back then? 216?
Correct.
Okay, so anything within 216 area code, we're not going to be able to have any kind of log of it. But a payphone within the 216 area code, you would, they are billed as such because you are paying for that call. So, and I don't know this to be fact, but I've always wondered, like, shit, man, couldn't you have done, and a 40-mile radius is a big radius, but there would have only been a certain amount of time between the time he walked her away at the plaza to the time that phone call was made. I feel like you could have done some kind of data dump or something and figured out a call to the Trading Times,
Right.
and maybe what payphone it came from. Now, if in fact it did come from a payphone, may not lead you to the killer. He could have drove in any direction afterwards.
But
what
it's
could have
more,
possibly gave you? It's more of the trail, because right now the trail ends at the visual trail ends at the plaza. The audio trail ends at the phone call.
Correct.
And then we have nothing after that, and we have nothing in between.
Nope.
So, the chief of police at the time, and I can't remember his name, forgive me, but one interview that he was doing, and I want to, this may have been shortly after the abduction or shortly after she was found, but he says outright, he's like, I would give everything that I have just for a vehicle description, or for, a black car, a red van, anything as simple as that is. They didn't have that. And if they did, if any of those reports came in, which we kind of know that some reports like that did come in, but they obviously didn't, they followed up on them and it didn't go anywhere. The description of this guy, of the killer, is not great, and it might have hurt the investigation. It also is it's a cop-out. It's a cop-out for the person that is suspicious or was suspicious of somebody at one point. Maybe it's a loved one, maybe it's a husband, a boyfriend, son, uncle, father, whomever. Somebody close to them that they were suspicious of. And as uncomfortable as that feeling was, it was so easy to look at the composite and go, well, I'm wrong. It can't be him. He doesn't look anything like that. I'm not calling anybody. And when you review this case, and when you see Dick Wren talking about this case, when you see Phil Torsney talking about this case, and Spetzel, what they're constantly trying to remind us is we still need that call. We still need the public's help. That is what is going to solve this case. Don't let anything deter you from making that tip. Don't look at the composite and go, well, it can't be him. He doesn't look like that. Call in the damn tip. Don't hear something, some teacher that moved to Florida did this. Don't hear that and go, well, I don't need to tell anybody what I know or something that I saw.
Right.
Because it's 30 years. They don't know who did this. They've said outright, we don't know who did this. They've had good suspects over the years, but and you and I have talked about this too.
Have you heard about Fairy Tale? The #1 bestseller from legendary storyteller Stephen King? King ventures into the deepest well of his imagination in this spellbinding novel. It follows a 17-year-old boy in a parallel world where good and evil are at war, and the stakes couldn't be higher for that world or ours. The New York Times Book Review calls Fairy Tale a page-turner driven by memorably strange encounters. Fairy Tale by Stephen King. Buy your copy today.
If there was somebody that they liked and had circumstantial evidence on, they would have found a way to bring charges against that individual.
100%.
They would have had a grand jury hearing. They would have made people talk that haven't spoken, and they would have built a case against that person. That hasn't happened. So what that means is whoever was a suspect, whether it be in the public's eye or in law enforcement's mind, we don't have the guy yet. Now, his name might be in the file somewhere. You've seen the boxes. What kind of mountain of papers is that?
Right.
There's a good chance his name is in that file somewhere, but they don't have the guy. And very likely, he's probably never been one of the top suspects, whether it be in the public's mind or in law enforcement's mind.
Yeah, and I know that. I mean, last week when I spoke to Chief Spetzel, I always try to ask the question of, do you feel like you're one step away from having the guy? Like you just need that one last thing. And the answer is always no, because they're not there. They need the public's help. And they want to emphasize that just because something's out there in the media does not mean that it's true. And they just want everybody to know that all the people that have been reported on or suspected in this case have been thoroughly, vetted. And it's just one of those things that if they felt like they had enough, I even asked Spetzel all about this. I said, listen, let me hear about the circumstantial case that you had, because he references a case. Bay does not have a lot of murders, but
right.
In 2001 or 2000, something like that, some guy got murdered at one of the mansions on the lake, right? Pretty much a half a mile from the plaza where Amy was abducted. But
Right.
they were able to pull all the phone records and do all those things. And they were able to, without any physical evidence, they were able to prosecute, get a conviction, sent the guy to jail. And they were able to do that with the phone records and all that stuff. And it's like, I asked him, I said, that's just so frustrating. And it has to be so frustrating for you as an investigator to know that just 10 years later, or 10 years earlier, you could have been using the same technology if it was available, and you would have been able to catch the killer. So, we wouldn't be 30 years talking about it.
I also wonder too, like in the early stages of the investigation, when you referenced earlier that when you were 10, you thought they were going to find her alive somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think, what was it, just a day or two in, somebody phoned in a tip that she was dropped off at the Euclid Mall. And they spent a lot of time running around in the mall looking for her.
Yeah, the Euclid Mall comes up a couple times, and I still have never been able to pin down what exactly the story is, if that's where they thought that she may have made the phone call from. I mean, if you know this Northeast Ohio and the city of Cleveland, to drive all the way over to Euclid, I mean, you're going from the suburbs through downtown to the east side of Cleveland, or through the east side.
You could get there in 40 minutes, though.
Sure.
It might be a little more difficult at 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, but
you'd still be able to do it.
You could do it.
And I mean, I guess where you're going with that is that's where the suspect could have been from, or that part of town, because that's still the 216 area code.
Yeah.
Especially, still to this day, but back then for sure. But yeah, it's I cannot believe that if it is the sketch that has thrown everything off, it's a shame, because you really shouldn't take eyewitness testimony or eyewitness sightings, like you should take them with a grain of salt, because of the fact that, dude, you bump into somebody. I've been told this analogy before. You bump into somebody at the mall 2 days ago, and somebody comes up to you today and asks you, what did that guy look like? I don't know. I mean, it's like, what did I eat for breakfast last Thursday? I don't know.
Well, and you tend to only remember things more vividly if they're extraordinary. If the guy was wearing a jacket that looked like something Elvis would wear, you would remember the jacket. Right. You might not remember him so much, but you would remember the jacket. This dude is milquetoast. This dude is plain Jane. He fits into the background
for a reason, I think.
Yeah. And that's one thing that they kept saying early on in this thing is this guy would have been familiar with the area enough to know some things about the area and feel comfortable there. But he wouldn't be so close to the area or from so close to the area that somebody would recognize him. He wouldn't go to the plaza believing that somebody would recognize him by name or occupation or anything like that. So that's your fine line right there. And I know that's kind of a profiling thing, but I believe it to be true. And to hear several law enforcement officers and agents to say that multiple times over the years, I believe that to be true as well. The Euclid Mall thing is just weird to me, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do want to mention that anybody that's followed this case, I've talked to multiple people about this case that are from the area that have followed it as long as me and you have, and it's one of those weird things. It comes up in conversation. Nobody really knows why it comes up in conversation. It doesn't make really any sense at all, but it's always just kind of been there. And anytime that it's come up, I've heard people go, yeah, I remember hearing something about Euclid, but I don't remember what it is. Maybe it was the whole thing of that person calling in and saying that Amy was dropped off at Euclid Mall. And maybe that's why it sticks with us. And very likely Euclid Mall has absolutely zero to do with the whole thing.
Yeah, and on top of that, I would say that if they were going to be going to any mall, and this is just like the game telephone. I mean, who knows if it was Elyria or Euclid, because Midway Mall is in Elyria, and that would be the more practical place to go if you're going to end up taking her to Ashland, because that right. way you'd be going the back roads to 83, and nobody would know the wiser.
Yeah.
And and it's still 216. So
you also got to wonder too, especially that first weekend and that first week that she was missing, when they're talking to individuals for whatever reason at all, those are going to be a much different interview, much different line of questioning, much different interaction than once her body is found in February of 1990. And the reason being is you are operating as an investigator under a different level of haste. She could still be alive. You're looking for different things when you're talking to these people, and your line of questioning is going to be different and probably hurried, because it's like when you've, and I hate to say this, but what the hell? It's like when you lose your keys. You check one place real quick and you move on to the next place, you move on to the next place, you move on to the next place until you find your keys. Same thing with this poor child. They're out there hoping to find her alive. I'm only going to talk to person X so long until I feel I can move on to Y and Z. And you wonder if during the course of that, if we've talked multiple times on True Crime Garage and on your great show about this dude, this killer just got lucky on a lot of things. He's not Hannibal Lecter. He's not, and you know what? Why is that the go-to when we want to like bring up like some brilliant criminal?
Yeah, he's a fictional character.
One, he's fictional, and he was apprehended.
He was in prison when he comes up.
Yes, so he wasn't so brilliant, but. Yeah, this guy wasn't smarter than the cops. He wasn't smarter than the community. He wasn't smarter than the FBI. He just got lucky. And he remains lucky to this day. There's somebody out there that could end this dude's luck, could end his luck.
Somebody knows something, and not to steal a line from CBC, but, seriously, somebody has to know something about what happened.
And then they found those stupid sweatpants over by Holly Hill Farms in the first few days, and spent so much time over there for the whole first week or 10 days. Mm-hmm. I mean, they went through there with a magnifying glass and a fine-tooth comb, flying planes and helicopters over the property.
And the pants weren't even hers.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like what I referenced when we talk about Mara Murray on True Crime Garage, or John Bonet Ramsey case. It's a similar situation where the police, detectives, whoever's responding, you almost believe you're showing up to one type of crime, and you soon find out that it's a different crime, and that's always very difficult for law enforcement. There are things that can be lost in those early days and early stages of the investigation. And who knows what what could have been missed when spending so much time at Holly Hill Farms, which I don't fault the police for doing so or the FBI for doing so. That would be a natural place to go. You're probably working under the assumption that the abductor knew Amy and likely knew Margaret because of the phone call when he says, "Hey, I work with your mother." Anybody at Holly Hill Farms would have known both Amy and Margaret at some level, at some capacity.
Now that's one part that I have trouble believing that there's any connection between the killer and Margaret. As far
I don't think that there is,
because this guy is cunning enough to make a phone call to convince a girl to come with him. I highly, highly doubt he would say, "Oh, and I work with your mom."
If he was actually connected to her.
If he was actually connected to her, there's just no way. You're already taking a chance by calling this girl at home. You're already breaking the law. I mean, technically, you're an adult. You shouldn't be trying to arrange meetings with, underage children. I mean, there was a whole Dateline series on this kind of stuff. But nonetheless, it's like he's making a phone call. He must. I don't know. I was talking to the captain, and we were talking about Madeline McCann, and we were talking about how she had been there for 5 or 6 days at the time that she was abducted. And that would have given somebody in that area enough time, if they were going to do something nefarious, or there was some sort of ring in that area, pedophile ring, sex trafficking ring, that they would have had enough time to figure out a way to get to her. And
yeah,
I feel like
those people were following the same routine day after day.
Right.
Even if it was just for 5 or 6 days, it was a very similar routine every single day. And by the time you see it the third time, you go, "Oh, well, this is the blueprint for what's going to continue to happen."
Well, absolutely. And then the captain also mentioned, like, somebody at the bar could have been keeping an eye on them and communicating to somebody on the outside about, they're still here and make your move. And it's just one of those, I hate to say it, but it's like there are so many sickos out there that have different desires as far as ages go and what they're attracted to and how far they'll go to get that high or, get off on whatever they're getting off on. It's just, it was definitely, in Amy's case, definitely something sexual. So I believe it was somebody that had seen her on the regular, because he knew enough to make her comfortable. That's just the way I feel about it. I mean, there's got to be some way that he knew her in some form or fashion. Maybe it was just visually, but
I do agree with that. And everything you're saying is similar to what some of the best and brightest FBI agents were saying about Amy's case. But then I go to this, and this is one of our first conversations about Amy's case, is let's pretend I'm the offender, I'm the perpetrator, I'm going to carry out this plot. If I see her and decide that I'm going to try to take her, and I have this idea that I'm going to get her to meet me somewhere, if I know nothing about her family, nothing about her schedule, just playing the odds, I'm going to call her home shortly after school. This would be around the 3:00 hour. I'm calling at this time because I believe that her parents would still be at work. She might be home alone. That's not hard to figure out. You don't need to know the kid or parent's schedule to come up with that on your own. And then the other thing too is the reference of "I work with your mother" is so interesting to me because we've talked about this before. If in fact it's a one-parent home, and I don't know if she lives with mom or dad or both, I'm going to pick mom because most of the time, even in a single-parent home, the child lives with their mother. I mean, you're playing the game. Basically, you're playing the odds, and you're hoping, because what you're doing in a sense is you're trying to build trust with this little girl. You're trying to get her to trust you, and therefore you have to get some things right during that conversation for her to believe you, for her to believe that you are who you say you are. Because if you strike out, she's not meeting you.
No, I mean, there's so many. That's why 30 years, it's like you can go down so many different rabbit holes. And I did want to follow up with the chief on one question, and that was the auto mechanic that had come out a couple of years later and stated that he had seen a van, or, you know, he saw something that day. And the way that Spetzel kind of countered that was, well, we spoke to him the day of, and he didn't recall any of that at the time. So generally speaking, you have to go with what, and you understand this, you have to go with what the first statements are. And generally those are the statements that are the most real and the most reflective of what actually happened.
Was that the van thing's weird.
Yeah.
Was that Rick Burns?
Yes.
Okay, I thought Rick Burns said he saw a Pontiac Grand Prix or Pontiac. Or
yeah,
Grand
he
Am.
said, I mean, he filled in a couple blanks that he didn't actually have, according to Chief Spetzel. And that it's not to say that he was doing anything to, you know, anything wrong. He just felt like it was a number of years after the fact that he came to them with these stories.
Did he report different vehicles at different times?
I know that he reported a vehicle. I'm not 100% sure on the exact vehicle. I know I think Renner has said that it was a Grand Prix, but again, I was pretty much told to take everything that he says with a grain of salt because of the fact that it was so many years after the fact, and he was there, but your mind can fill in blanks that, you know, it's just your mind can play tricks on you.
Well, and the thing is too, over time, one can believe something was important, but he obviously didn't believe. What I want to be clear on is I'm not calling him a liar.
Oh, no,
no.
No.
What I'm saying is whatever he's saying may in fact be absolutely 100% true. But if what Spetzel is saying is true, then Rick Burns didn't believe what he's saying years later to be any importance immediately after the abduction. So, and your mind can do that. Like you said, your mind can fill in the blanks, one, and your mind can also add weight to things that there's not reason to add weight to them. If he didn't feel like it was important that day, I can't imagine why it's important 10 years later.
Thanks so much again to Nick from the True Crime Garage podcast for joining me this week to discuss this very special case. If you have not, as I said before, listened to his show, True Crime Garage, I highly recommend it. If you are a true crime fan, you will find the banter between the captain and Nick to be well worth your time. And if you have any information regarding the death of Amy Renee Mihaljevic, you are requested to contact the Bay Village Police Department at 440-871-1234. Or you can contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI, as they are offering a reward of up to $25,000 for information leading to the arrest of the individual or individuals responsible for the death of Amy Renee Mihaljevic. If you enjoy this independently produced podcast, you can help support the show by clicking on the right-hand side of whokilledamymihaljevic.com and click the donate button, or you can donate via the Venmo app with my username @BillHuffman3. Any amount is appreciated, and it really does help keep the show running. If you do enjoy the podcast, could you please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to shows? It will help support the show and keep Amy's story in the spotlight. If you'd like to stay up to date on the cases that I've covered and the new shows in the pipeline, please follow me on Twitter @BillHuffman3. If you have any new information, again, it's 440-871-1234. The Bay Village Police Department is looking for closure, and the FBI is offering a reward. The time to call is now. So until next week, be safe.
"3 a.m. the comedy horror podcast that holds weekly gatherings around the campfire. Let me tell you what you're going to get. You're going to hear stories about demonic possessions, prison stabbings, skinwalkers, glitches in the Matrix, cult leaders, missing 411, night marchers, Operation Paperclip, Mesopotamian devil worship, and so many monsters it'll give Kanye West a runaway for his money. Pop and meme culture also aren't off topic. A camp where laughs and scares are constantly competing for first place. We're just a group of friends, trying to bust each other's balls, find the best stories, and expand the circle in the process. 3 a.m., the comedy horror podcast, not for the faint or fragile of heart. Let's go.
Hello out there! Yes, hello out there, everyone. I'm Hal Schwartz.
And I'm Flynn McLean. Together we host None But the Brave, a podcast dedicated to the music and career of Bruce Springsteen.
Bruce and E Street Band are on tour right now for the first time in 6 years, and we're taking a detailed look at what's happening on stage in our bi-weekly episodes.
We've also been recently joined by some very exciting guests, including rock journalist Warren Zanes and Stephen Hyden, Backstreet's Magazine founder Charles Cross, and Barstool's Kirk Minahan.
If you're a diehard Springsteen fan, this is the show for you.
So please subscribe to None But the Brave on your favorite podcasting platform, and we hope to see you further on up the road.
Thank you so much. We'll be seeing you.